Here's something a lot of people don't realize. The reason you can't sleep at night might have almost nothing to do with what you're doing at night. Think about that for a second. Most people who struggle with sleep spend all their energy trying to fix the last 30 minutes before bed. They download apps, they buy supplements, they switch to chamomile tea, they try every relaxation trick they've heard of, and they lie there anyway, staring at the ceiling, watching the hours go by, silently catastrophizing about how wrecked they're going to feel tomorrow. But here's what's actually happening. Sleep isn't something that starts when you get into bed. Sleep is something your body has been building, or failing to build, since the moment you woke up that morning. By the time you hit the pillow, most of the work is already done, or not done. That distinction changes everything about how you approach this problem. Today, we're going through 10 evidence-based routines that can genuinely transform your sleep. Not in a vague, try to relax more kind of way. In a specific, biologically grounded, here's exactly why this works kind of way. Some of these will be familiar. Some of them will surprise you. And at least one of them is probably the opposite of what you've been doing. Let's start with how sleep actually works, because without that foundation, none of the rest of this makes much sense. Your sleep is controlled by two separate biological systems working in parallel. Scientists call this the two-process model. The first is called the homeostatic sleep drive. This is essentially a pressure system. Every hour you are awake, a chemical called adenosine builds up in your brain. It accumulates slowly throughout the day, and as it does, it creates a growing pressure to sleep, a kind of biological weight that gets heavier the longer you stay awake. By the time evening rolls around, if that pressure has been building for 15 or 16 hours, your brain is practically begging for rest. The second system is your circadian rhythm. This is your internal 24-hour clock, managed by a tiny cluster of neurons in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It doesn't just tell you when to feel sleepy. It regulates cortisol, melatonin, body temperature, metabolism, and dozens of other processes. And crucially, it is calibrated almost entirely by one thing: light. When both systems are working properly and in sync, when your sleep pressure has been building all day and your circadian clock is signaling that it's nighttime, falling asleep is almost effortless. You get into bed, your body temperature drops, melatonin rises, and you're out. When those systems are out of sync, or when the pressure hasn't built properly, or when your clock is confused about what time of day it actually is, that's when you lie there for hours unable to sleep. That's insomnia. Not some mysterious condition, a disrupted biological system. And here's the genuinely hopeful part of that. Disrupted systems can be repaired. Routine 1: the anchor that runs everything. If there is one single habit that underpins almost everything else on this list, it's this one. Wake up at the same time every day. Not a rough estimate, not around 7, the same time every morning, including weekends. This sounds deceptively simple, and most people discount it immediately because they've heard some version of it before. But the reason it matters goes much deeper than most people understand. Remember adenosine, that sleep pressure chemical? When you wake up, your brain starts the clock. Adenosine begins accumulating from the moment you open your eyes. The longer you're awake, the more of it builds up. If you wake at 7 every morning and stay awake until 11 at night, you've built 16 hours of solid sleep pressure by bedtime. That pressure is what makes sleep feel natural and deep. Now here's the problem. If you wake up at 7 during the week and sleep until 10 on the weekend, you've just cleared several hours of adenosine and shifted your internal clock later. By Sunday night, you don't have enough sleep pressure built up for an early bedtime. You lie there unable to sleep. You wake up tired on Monday. You drink extra coffee to compensate, which actually blocks adenosine from doing its job. And then you can't fall asleep Monday night either. This is what researchers call social jet lag, and it's remarkably common. Consistent wake time is the cornerstone of a treatment protocol called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBT-I, which is the gold standard first-line clinical approach for chronic insomnia, not medication, behavioral therapy. And the fixed wake time is where it starts, every single time. Pick a realistic wake time that fits your life, set it once, and hold it like it means something. Because physiologically, it really does. Routine 2. What you do in the first hour after waking. Most people wake up and immediately check their phone, which honestly is almost impressively counterproductive from a sleep biology standpoint. What your circadian clock actually needs in the first 30 to 60 minutes after you wake up is bright light, ideally natural sunlight. Here's the mechanism. Your eyes contain specialized cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. These cells contain a photopigment called melanopsin, which is particularly sensitive to short wavelength blue light, the kind that's abundant in natural daylight. These cells connect directly to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in your brain. Morning light exposure tells that clock, it's morning, reset. Start the timer for tonight's melatonin release approximately 14 hours from now. Without that signal, your clock drifts. Melatonin ends up rising too late or at the wrong time or not strongly enough, and your sleep window shifts in ways that make falling asleep harder. The practical takeaway is straightforward. Get outside within 30 to 60 minutes of waking. Even 10 to 30 minutes of natural outdoor light makes a meaningful difference, and even on a cloudy day, outdoor light is significantly brighter than typical indoor lighting. If you live somewhere with limited daylight seasons, a 10,000 lux light therapy lamp is a well-researched alternative. And then in the evening, from about 90 minutes before you want to sleep, the opposite applies. Dim the lights, reduce screen brightness, let your home get darker. This allows melatonin to rise naturally, which is what's supposed to happen when the sun goes down. Modern indoor environments and glowing devices disrupt this cycle by keeping your brain convinced it's still afternoon. We'll come back to the screen issue in more detail shortly. Morning brightness, evening darkness. It sounds almost too simple, but it's directly addressing the biological machinery that controls when your body is willing to sleep. Routine 3, the one that works while you're not even thinking about sleep. Daytime exercise is one of the most underrated sleep interventions that exists, not because it tires you out in some vague sense, because of what it does at a cellular and physiological level. Physical activity increases adenosine buildup, adding to that sleep pressure we talked about. It also promotes deeper, more restorative, slow-wave sleep, sometimes called deep sleep. And it reduces anxiety and stress through several mechanisms, including the release of endorphins and a protein called BDNF, which supports emotional regulation. Multiple meta-analyses, analyses that pool the results of many studies at once, confirm that regular moderate aerobic exercise improves sleep quality, sleep duration, and sleep efficiency in people with insomnia. The benefits compound over time and are particularly pronounced in sedentary adults and older adults whose bodies simply aren't being physically challenged enough during the day. Now, the timing caveat. Vigorous exercise within about an hour of bedtime can raise your core body temperature and increase physiological arousal, both of which work against falling asleep. Moderate movement in the evening is generally fine for most people, but intense training right before bed? That's basically the sleep equivalent of having a strong coffee and then wondering why you feel wired. Morning or early afternoon exercise is ideal, especially if you combine it with outdoor light. A morning walk gives you movement, adenosine buildup, and circadian light exposure all at once. That's a genuinely efficient use of 30 minutes. Routine 4. Where racing thoughts actually come from. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. The reason your brain won't stop running through tomorrow's to-do list at 11 at night isn't because you're an anxious person. It's because you didn't give your brain time to process those things during the day. There's a concept in psychology called the Zeigarnik effect. Unfinished or unresolved tasks stay active in your working memory. Your brain keeps them running in the background like open tabs because, from an evolutionary standpoint, unresolved threats and responsibilities need to stay accessible. When you're finally still and quiet at night, all those open tabs surface at once. The solution isn't to try to push the thoughts away when they appear, which almost never works. It's to give them a proper time and place earlier in the day. This technique is called scheduled worry time, and it's a validated component of CBT-I. Set aside 15 to 30 minutes each afternoon, but ideally before 7 in the evening, and use that time to write down everything that's worrying you, everything you need to handle, every thought that's been circling. On paper, not on your phone. There's something about physically writing that helps externalize the content, engaging the prefrontal cortex for problem solving, and reducing the emotional charge that the amygdala, your brain's alarm system, would otherwise maintain. When you do this consistently, something interesting happens. Your brain starts to trust that the worries will be addressed. The urgency to process them at midnight fades. The open tabs get closed, or at least minimized. And this becomes important later when we talk about what to do when you wake at 3 in the morning and your thoughts are already in full gear. The scheduled worry habit is part of what makes that easier to navigate. Routine 5. The environment your brain has been waiting for. Sleep is a biological process, and like most biological processes, it has environmental requirements. Your core body temperature needs to drop by approximately 1 to 2 degrees Celsius for sleep to initiate and sustain properly. Heat disrupts this. A warm bedroom, particularly above around 19 or 20 degrees Celsius, or roughly 67 Fahrenheit, increases wakefulness and reduces both deep sleep and REM sleep. Most sleep researchers recommend keeping your sleep environment somewhere between 15 and 19 degrees Celsius, roughly 60 to 67 Fahrenheit, cooler than most people think. Darkness matters too. Light, any light, suppresses melatonin through those same melanopsin cells we discussed earlier. Even low-level ambient light from a hallway, a street lamp through curtains, or a standby LED can measurably interfere with melatonin production and sleep architecture. Blackout curtains or a sleep mask are not paranoia. They're addressing a genuine biological interference. Noise above roughly 35 decibels begins to fragment sleep, even when you don't consciously wake up. White noise or pink noise can be effective not because they improve sleep directly, but because they create a consistent sonic environment that masks sudden changes. A door closing, traffic, a partner shifting in bed, that would otherwise trigger brief micro-arousals. And there's a behavioral element to the sleep environment too. CBT-I protocols emphasize something called stimulus control. The idea is that your bed should be associated exclusively with sleep and intimacy, nothing else. If you regularly watch TV in bed, scroll through your phone in bed, eat in bed, or lie awake worrying in bed, your brain gradually learns to associate the bed with wakefulness and frustration. That association, once formed, is surprisingly hard to shake. Protecting the bed as a sleep-only space keeps the association clean. Routine 6. Wind down, don't force down. Here's a subtle but important distinction. The goal of your pre-bed routine is not to force yourself to sleep at a specific time. It's to reduce arousal gradually so that sleep becomes possible. There's a phenomenon that sleep researchers sometimes call performance anxiety around sleep. People with insomnia often try so hard to fall asleep, watching the clock, calculating how many hours they have left, catastrophizing about tomorrow, that the effort itself keeps them awake. Trying to sleep is one of the most effective ways to prevent it. What works instead is shifting your focus from the bedtime to the wind down. Starting about 60 to 90 minutes before your intended sleep time, begin reducing stimulation. Dim the lights. Change into comfortable clothes. Do something you find genuinely relaxing. Reading a physical book, light stretching, a warm bath or shower, calm music. Not something passive that might pull you into 2 more hours of screen content. Something that genuinely signals to your nervous system that the day is ending. The warm bath, incidentally, is more than just relaxing. When you submerge in warm water and then get out, your blood vessels dilate to release heat, and your core body temperature drops. That temperature drop actually mimics and assists the cooling process that initiates sleep, which sounds relaxing in theory, and in this case actually is. The consistent schedule matters here as well. Going to bed and waking up at consistent times stabilizes your circadian rhythm and tells your body when to expect sleep. You don't need to be rigid about the exact minute, but a rough window of consistency, within 30 to 45 minutes each night, makes a real physiological difference over time. Routine 7. The things you consume that are quietly wrecking your sleep. Caffeine is a molecule that works by blocking adenosine receptors in your brain. That's it. That's the entire mechanism. It doesn't give you energy, it prevents you from feeling the fatigue you're accumulating. And with a half-life of roughly 5 to 6 hours, a coffee at 3 in the afternoon still has about half its caffeine content active in your system at 9 at night. Most people dramatically underestimate how much late caffeine affects their sleep quality. You might fall asleep fine. Caffeine doesn't always prevent sleep onset, especially if you're tired enough, but it reduces the proportion of deep, restorative, slow-wave sleep. You wake up having technically slept 7 or 8 hours, but feeling like it wasn't enough, because biochemically, it wasn't the quality of sleep your body needed. The general guidance from sleep research is to cut off caffeine by around 2 in the afternoon. For people who are particularly sensitive or who are actively working on improving their sleep, moving that earlier can make a noticeable difference. Alcohol is a separate issue worth addressing directly because the widespread belief that alcohol helps sleep is one of the most persistent misconceptions in this space. Alcohol does sedate you. It can help you fall asleep faster, which is why it feels helpful. But it suppresses REM sleep, the stage critical for memory consolidation, emotional processing, and cognitive restoration. And it causes what's called a rebound effect in the second half of the night, when your brain compensates for the sedation by increasing arousal. The result is fragmented sleep, early waking, and feeling unrested despite having slept. Nicotine is a stimulant. Heavy meals close to bedtime raise your core body temperature and can cause enough digestive discomfort to fragment sleep. Finishing substantial meals 2 to 3 hours before bed gives your body time to begin that processing before sleep is needed. None of these are revelations in isolation, but people consistently underestimate the cumulative effect of combining several of these habits regularly. The body keeps score. Routine 8. The nap question. Napping is not inherently bad for sleep, but it is a lever that needs to be handled thoughtfully. A short nap, 20 to 30 minutes in the early afternoon, can restore alertness and reduce the functional cost of a poor night without substantially reducing your nighttime sleep drive. That adenosine that's been building since you woke up, a short nap clears only a small amount of it. You can rest, feel refreshed, and still have plenty of sleep pressure by bedtime. Long naps are a different story. A 90-minute nap or a 2-hour nap in the afternoon burns through a significant portion of the adenosine you need to feel genuinely sleepy at night. And late naps, even short ones close to 5 or 6 in the evening, can push your sleep window later and make initiating sleep difficult. If you're dealing with active insomnia, the general clinical recommendation is to avoid naps entirely until your nighttime sleep is more consolidated. The short-term discomfort of feeling tired during the day helps rebuild the homeostatic pressure that makes nighttime sleep deeper and more reliable. If you don't have insomnia and just want to optimize, a short, early afternoon nap is fine. Just keep it under 30 minutes and set an alarm. Routine 9. Blue light and the problem of artificial daylight at night. We've already established why evening light disrupts sleep, but the specific issue of blue light from screens is worth its own dedicated attention because it's become one of the most relevant modern disruptions to sleep quality. Blue light. Wavelengths roughly between 400 and 500 nanometers, with peak effects around 460 to 480 nanometers, is the specific range that most strongly activates your melanopsin cells and suppresses melatonin. And it's the dominant wavelength emitted by phones, tablets, laptops, and LED screens. Research from Harvard found that 6.5 hours of blue light exposure suppressed melatonin twice as long as green light of comparable brightness and shifted circadian rhythms by approximately 3 hours, compared to 1.5 hours for green light. That's not a trivial difference. A 3-hour phase delay in your melatonin onset means your body isn't biologically ready to sleep until hours later than you'd like it to be. Evening screen use, particularly after 9 or 10 p.m., tells your brain that it's daytime. Your melatonin doesn't rise, your alertness doesn't drop, and then you get into bed and wonder why you feel wired instead of sleepy. The most effective intervention is a screen curfew, 60 to 90 minutes before bed. Full stop. If that isn't realistic, using night mode, warm-toned screen filters, or blue light blocking glasses with strong amber lenses can reduce the impact, though behavioral change is more effective than technological mitigation. This is also worth connecting back to routine 2. The same biology that makes morning sunlight helpful is what makes evening screen light harmful. You're not fighting against your phone, you're working with the same light-sensitive system, just at a different time of day. Most people don't realize that these two habits, morning light exposure and evening screen reduction, are essentially two sides of the same biological lever. Both work directly on the master clock. Both make a measurable difference, and combining them produces a greater effect than either one alone. Routine 10. Teaching your nervous system to let go. The last routine is the one that most directly addresses the psychological layer of insomnia, the hyperarousal, the racing mind, the feeling that your body is somehow revved up when it should be winding down. Chronic insomnia isn't just a behavioral problem, it's often a physiological state. People with insomnia tend to show elevated cortisol levels, higher heart rates, increased sympathetic nervous system activity, the biological signature of a stress response, even when they're trying to sleep. Their brain activity shows more high-frequency beta waves than people who sleep normally. The body is, in a very literal sense, alert when it should be quiet. Daily relaxation practice, not just at bedtime but as a regular part of your day, can genuinely shift this baseline. The techniques with the most evidence behind them include deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, mindfulness meditation, and gratitude journaling. Deep breathing slows your heart rate by activating the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response that counteracts fight or flight. A simple pattern like inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 7, and exhaling for 8 can produce a measurable shift in physiological arousal within minutes. Progressive muscle relaxation works by systematically tensing and releasing different muscle groups throughout your body, teaching you to recognize and release physical tension that you often don't realize you're holding. Mindfulness, practiced not as a sleep intervention specifically, but as a daily habit of present moment awareness, reduces rumination and the tendency to get caught in loops of future-oriented worry. Over time, it trains the prefrontal cortex to regulate the amygdala more effectively. The key word in all of this is daily. These aren't techniques for emergencies. They're habits that, practiced consistently, lower your general level of physiological arousal so that when bedtime comes, the drop from your daytime state to a sleep-ready state isn't as steep. This matters more than people think. One of the reasons insomnia perpetuates itself is that the anxiety about not sleeping creates exactly the kind of arousal that prevents sleeping. It becomes a loop. Daily relaxation practice is one of the few things that can directly interrupt that loop at the physiological level. You might have noticed by now that none of these routines exist in isolation. They work together because they're targeting the same underlying systems, the homeostatic sleep drive and the circadian clock, from multiple angles at once. Consistent wake time builds sleep pressure and anchors your clock. Morning light reinforces the clock and triggers morning cortisol. Daytime exercise adds to sleep pressure and reduces anxiety. Scheduled worry time clears the cognitive load that would otherwise surface at midnight. Sleep environment optimization removes physical barriers to the temperature drop and melatonin rise that sleep requires. Wind-down routine lowers arousal gradually without triggering performance anxiety. Cutting caffeine and alcohol late preserves both sleep architecture and the natural adenosine accumulation you need. Managing naps protects nighttime sleep pressure. Reducing evening blue light allows melatonin to rise on schedule. And daily relaxation practice shifts your baseline physiological state so sleep becomes something your body can actually access. This is essentially the behavioral framework that clinical research in CBT-I has been building for decades. It's not a collection of separate tips, it's an integrated approach to restoring the biological conditions your body needs to sleep well. Most people see meaningful improvements within 1 to 4 weeks of consistent application. And that phrase, consistent application, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. These habits need to be practiced regularly enough to actually shift the underlying biology. One good night doesn't fix insomnia, but 2 to 3 weeks of consistent behavior genuinely can. Before we wrap up, there's one more layer worth addressing. Because for many people with insomnia, the problem has gone on long enough that they've developed a secondary anxiety about sleep itself. You start dreading bedtime. You watch the clock. You calculate. You worry about the worrying. You think, I need to fall asleep soon or tomorrow will be a disaster. And that thought in itself is enough to keep your nervous system activated for another 2 hours. This is called sleep performance anxiety, and it's one of the most common perpetuating factors in chronic insomnia. The original trigger for the poor sleep might have been stress or illness or a life event, but what's keeping it going is the anxiety loop. 2 things help here directly. The first is shifting your focus away from a specific bedtime toward a wind-down routine, which we already covered. The second is adjusting your expectations about sleep variability. Everyone has poor nights. Sleep varies from night to night by nature. A bad night doesn't mean your sleep is broken, it means you had a bad night. The catastrophic interpretation of that, "This will ruin everything," is the part that turns one bad night into a pattern. Sleep trackers can sometimes exacerbate this. There's actually a clinical term now, orthosomnia, for the insomnia that arises from obsessing over sleep data from wearables. If your tracker is making you anxious rather than informed, a simple handwritten sleep diary, recording how you felt, not precise numbers, is both more useful and less likely to feed the anxiety loop. The goal isn't perfect sleep. The goal is sustainable, good enough sleep, which, when your biology is aligned and your habits are consistent, is entirely achievable for most people. The most effective place to start isn't with all 10 of these at once. That level of change all at once is hard to sustain. Start with the 3 that have the strongest foundational impact: a consistent wake time, morning light exposure, and cutting caffeine before 2 in the afternoon. Hold those for a week. Then layer in scheduled worry time and the evening screen curfew. Then address your sleep environment. Then the wind-down routine. If your insomnia is severe, has been going on for months, or is significantly impairing your daily life, the behavioral approaches in this video are absolutely worth pursuing. But consider pairing them with a CBT-I therapist or a digital CBT-I program. CBT-I has a 70 to 80% success rate in clinical studies. Its effects are more durable than sleep medications and don't come with dependency or side effects. It's not a last resort. It's actually the first-line clinical recommendation. And if you've never had a sleep study and you're consistently waking up unrefreshed, snoring, or experiencing symptoms of disordered breathing, it's worth ruling out sleep apnea. Sleep apnea can look a lot like insomnia, and no amount of sleep hygiene will resolve a structural airway issue. Sleep is not a passive event that just happens to you. It's an active biological process that your daytime choices either support or undermine. The good news, and this really is good news, is that the biology is largely in your control. You've just spent 30-some minutes learning exactly how it works. You have 10 concrete routines grounded in the same science that clinicians use when treating chronic insomnia. And unlike most health changes, the benefits here show up relatively quickly. Within 2 to 3 weeks, most people who apply even a handful of these consistently start noticing real differences, not just in sleep, but in energy, mood, focus, and the general sense of not running on empty every day. That's not a small thing. Sleep is foundational in a way that almost nothing else is. Memory, immunity, metabolism, cardiovascular health, mental health, cognitive function, all of it depends on the quality of the sleep your body is getting each night. So pick your starting point. Hold it. Build from there. If this kind of content is useful to you, practical, science-grounded explanations of how your body actually works, subscribe and stick around. There's a lot more where this came from.